What I'm going to talk about is what's called the San Francisco Better Streets Plan, and what the part of this that I worked on was the street design manual portion of it. It really is a much larger process than that. And sort of ticking off on some of the themes, because some of the points for the different presentations, because this isn't organized to specifically address each of the points. A couple of things interesting about this manual. It's both a city and a county manual, because San Francisco is this oddity of being both a city and a county. Given that it really became important as a process, because what you see here is all of the departments of the city and the county that were involved in this project. It was managed and primarily funded through the Transportation Authority, which handles the sales tax in San Francisco and the distribution of that money. The lead city department, though, in terms of content, was the planning department. And then the Public Works Department was involved in it, and SFPUC, which is the Public Utilities Commission, and you'll see some of a parallel project that they were going through at the time. What was key to this project, though, was the mayor's office. Gavin Newsom was the mayor at the time, and he had become really intrigued by what Chicago was doing and the greening of the streets of Chicago, and wanted to do something similar in San Francisco. So he established within the mayor's office a leader in the mayor's office in terms of getting the city to make the streets more green. Unfortunately, right after the startup of the project, the greening director left to go to Seattle, and the director that was in that position for the rest of the project and up until recently was not as engaged as I think we all might have hoped in the street manual. But I would say that at key times the mayor's office did put pressure on the directors. So it looked complicated from the client side. It was also pretty complicated from the consulting side. Because we decided that we really needed to put together a set of experts around all the issues that we saw that would come up in the project. So this is all of the consultants who were involved in our team, and then Nelson Nygaard, Michael's firm, was handling the public outreach, and they had a whole team of consultants and partners, including a number of nonprofits and community groups in San Francisco. So sort of using the stakeholder infrastructure of the city to outreach to the public during the process. So the work that we did started in 2007, went through into 2009 is about the time that the consultants handed off the document to the city staff to complete it that summer into the fall. It was adopted by the Board of Supervisors in January of this year. And then there has been a lot of ongoing work to implement the plan. And as you'll see as we get further into this, they were actually implementing the plan while we were still writing it. Part of the impetus of this, and I think that it's the impetus of a lot of this kind of focus on greening that a lot of cities are looking at, is this issue that in most cities in the United States, 25% or so of the land area is in public streets. And so for mature cities like San Francisco, mature places like LA County, Santa Monica, all sorts of cities all around the country, the streets are really the major opportunity at this point to improve public open space, to improve the civic space of cities. And San Francisco, looking around at their streets, saw a lot of opportunity for improvement. So here's a couple, that was an existing street. This is Octavia Boulevard, which was fairly recently redone. And there was also a recognition that there was a real need for agency coordination. This is a diagram that was put together early in the project to explain to people from the different departments in the city, in the county, why we were asking them to attend meetings. It's because everybody, all of these different parts of the street are under the control of different departments. They have their own standards, their own practices for construction, maintenance, all these sorts of things. So if you want to look at a unified vision for what should happen with the streets of the city, you do have to get all these agencies to talk to each other and coordinate. Even in 2007, and even more so now, there was a focus on maintenance. How can things be implemented? And the idea was to come up with a set of standards that could then be used as a guide to go and revise other standards in the city so that all the departments would have a coordinated set of standards. There were also other processes, as I mentioned, that were going on. Like many cities in the United States, portions of San Francisco, the majority of San Francisco, is a combined sewer system. So stormwater and sewage go through the same pipe. And although there are all those rumors that it never really rains in California all that much, it does. And when it does, often sewage ends up overflowing into the bay or into the Pacific Ocean, and they need to stop doing that. So the PUC has been working on a whole plan around encouraging green infrastructure within streets to help handle some of these situations and spread the peak of the water flow. Another thing that was unique about this planning effort, and sort of unfortunately one of those things that is a positive in California planning law but can become quite a yoke to bear at times, is CEQA, that we have our own Environmental Quality Act. And it is used for good and used for evil. And it was, in a sense, used for evil because the city had been doing a bicycle plan. And they had gone through what they called a negative declaration. Basically, these things that we're going to do, improving the streets for bicycles, isn't going to have an environmental impact. Therefore, we don't have to go through the whole preparation of an environmental document. And some of the pro-auto folks in San Francisco sued the city, saying that, no, there is going to be a negative impact. Probably along the lines of that cute, cuddly engineer that we heard in the video earlier. And they succeeded. They got a judge to say, yes, that this is an extensive enough thing that you're doing, that you do need to do an environmental document. So the city attorney told the team working on the Better Streets plan, great idea that you're doing this, just don't map anything on a street map of the city. Don't say what streets or what street type. Go about creating your guidelines. So it is kind of interesting. We did prepare a map. Never saw the light of day though, but it was a tool that we used as we were going through the work internally. So, at one sense, it was a challenge. At another level, it did, I think, sort of free us up. As I said, there was understanding that there was a need for this because there were things happening already in San Francisco. Neighborhoods wanted to see their streets greened. So there were ad hoc efforts going on with neighborhoods and with city staff, looking at making improvements to streets, green infrastructure, additional landscape, permeable paving, all the things that we would want to see happening, but everything was an exception to the standard. Why does it need to be so difficult to do something that looks basically as simple as this and can make such a big change? Stormwater management was important. I think generally it would have been just this idea of greening, but again, because of these stormwater quality and sewer issues, there was a lot of effort put into this. And this idea of having an urban forest, really finding the opportunities to increase trees in the streets in San Francisco. San Francisco really does not have that many trees in the streets. dealing with some cultural sensitivity issues, particularly in the Asian population, and people sort of focused on feng shui and other things. Street trees can be quite challenging to fitting in with those sort of design practices and the way that people think about their spaces. Again, the city was moving through this parallel process, looking at the watersheds of the city, trying to figure out how to focus on major streets that were coming up for redevelopment, and how those could integrate green infrastructure into them.
Can you give me an example of feng shui tree?
Well, it's this whole thing of the relationship of entries to buildings and that sort of thing, and if a tree may block good feng shui, depending on where it ends up in the street. If you can put it in some place in the street where it's creating a benefit and blocking some of the negative feng shui, then that's a great thing, but it is an issue, and it's sort of, for some people, it's become more of a general thing because it's so difficult to figure these things out. We just don't like trees.
How do you spell shui?
You would ask me that.
S-E-N-G.
S-E-N-G.
S-H-U-I.
So another thing that we looked at, and this is about both trees and green infrastructure, and this is, I think, generally the case in most very urban places. We developed a set of diagrams. There's even a three-dimensional version of this diagram, looking at, well, where really are the opportunities to do landscape and plant trees within a street? And mapped out all of the different standards in the city. You can't have a tree within 5 feet of a fire hydrant, 3 feet from street furniture, 3 to 5 feet from a parking meter, 3 feet from a curb ramp, 5 feet from the corner property line, 5 feet from a utility box, and 5 feet from a utility pole. On many streets, then there are curb cuts as well, lots of garages and residential areas of San Francisco on very small lots. So you can really end up with a situation where there is only a particular place that you can set a tree, and then when you lay on feng shui on top of that, there may be nothing. So really quite challenging. But one of the things that was realized is that a lot of the streets are wider than they really need to be, the existing rights of way. So there are opportunities to green within what is currently the curbs. And so a lot of the work was focused on finding opportunities for that. We did look at different street types. I think that's one thing that you'll see in most of the discussion of these different manuals, is there's different ways of thinking about types. It ended up being that we did a combination of land use and some transportation function. So really here it's whether it's a throughway or a neighborhood street. Then there are special streets that were looked at, parkways, boulevards, ceremonial streets, and then the smaller streets like alleys and shared public ways. And then there are mixed-use streets and industrial streets. And those all had effects on what techniques could be used from the toolbox in the streets. Here's an example of a neighborhood street. This isn't even some of the smaller residential lots. This is out in the Sunset District, out towards the Pacific Ocean. So again, not very many trees. Finding those opportunities for trees, permeable paving, and again, doing things out within the curb to green the street and to traffic calm.
Those are photomontages?
Yeah. This is Fillmore. And I'll actually get back to this at the end, but this was one of the simulations that was done looking at, again, the sort of green improvements, doing some bulb outs for bus, making a one-way street into a two-way street, and then potentially doing dedicated lanes for transit coming through this street. Again, in terms of the city and the county structure, this is sort of the organizational structure that the city has been developing for how they're implementing the Better Streets Plan. So different departments have teams that are focused on streets. SFMTA is the transportation agency, so they run the transit system. They are involved in the design of streets and in transportation planning in the city. There's a street design review team now that has people from the different departments in the city and county. There's a group that's focused on finding the capital to get the work to happen. And there still is the Better Streets team that is continuing to develop the different materials that are needed for the staffs in the city to change their guidelines and implement what the Better Streets plan is asking for. There is a new website that's been developed. At the end of the presentation, I'll give you some information on this. But it's set up for the community to use, for the development community to use, and hopefully even some of the people in the different city departments do go and look at it. As I said, it was being implemented even as we were doing the work, as we were doing the plan. This is Leland Avenue in sort of the southern part of the city. The project was completed in September 2010. The Better Streets Plan was adopted in 2011. Pretty interesting opportunities to move things forward quickly. Divisadero Street, something that has been happening quite a bit in the city is this idea of putting quote-unquote temporary structures in the parking lane of streets. So this seating on the wood platform there is in the parking lane, and there are planters and other things to provide some separation from the traffic. Cesar Chavez is a major street in the Mission District, connecting from the 101 freeway into the Mission District in Noe Valley. A project was done there to put in medians, slow the traffic, really do some speed management, and add bike lanes. Columbus Street, which is in North Beach, there's been an effort there to look at some improvements that could be made. Some of these improvements now are starting to get some funding and will probably be moving forward soon. This is the kind of situation that's there today. A lot of the cafe and restaurants along Columbus do have seating out on the sidewalks, but it gets a bit narrow, creating some ADA issues at times and just an overcrowding of the sidewalks. So again, this idea of maybe taking advantage of in some places of the parking lane and using that for seating. These are some of the other projects that are moving forward in the city. Combination of specific planning projects, specific improvements, as well as broader programs for the city. There are also currently 2 BRT projects being planned in the city that were being worked on long before the Better Streets Plan started, but now there are opportunities for the Better Streets Plan to really help inform those. Some of the other street projects around the city and some of the area plans that are happening. Another thing that has a tangential relationship is the Pavement to Parks program, where basically they've been looking at where are there areas currently within streets that can be taken over and become parks. A lot of it starts with more of temporary types of structures. This is similar to the program in New York City. Again, here on the bottom, you see another example of those platforms being used out in a parking lane. And I think there's actually more than 8 projects now. There's probably about 10 or 12 that have been built. I did want to touch on the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan. Because this is an example of how the city is now getting to mapping the streets and designating types. That's basically what they've done is said, okay, since we couldn't do it as an overall city plan, as different planning efforts move forward in the city, one of the first things you need to do is map the street types on your street network because you're already planning on doing a CEQA document and you can handle all those concerns. So for the Eastern Neighborhoods plan, we've been working with Nelson Nygaard. We're a subconsultant to them on this. This is a map that was done, sorry, it's kind of hard to see, of the different street types. Interestingly, all of this sort of magenta color that you see over the majority of these streets. This is the South of Market area, sort of up at the top there, Potrero, that's sort of the edge of Potrero Hill, getting into the industrial area. And all these areas around the Mission Bay redevelopment area. UCSF is doing a new hospital here. There's also facilities here that are doing a lot of high-tech research. Mostly old industrial area, that some of it's being transitioned to other uses. But the majority of the streets end up being mixed-use streets because of that character of the existing use, and most of the future use is also very mixed use in its character. So I wanted to focus in on a couple of the streets that we've been looking at in more detail, Folsom and Howard. Folsom was that simulation that turned into bus lanes. And then 7th and 8th are crossing streets that connect from the 101 freeway into the downtown area of the city. We've been working with a team of consultants and city staff developing different alternatives for the redesign of these streets, and it's been going through a public review process. This is one of the alternatives developed for Folsom and Howard, where the same kind of street would be done on each of these. It's a one-way couplet today, Folsom and Howard. So this would maintain the one-way couplet, adding a cycle track that's also one-directional, and creates the opportunity for some expanded sidewalks. The one thing that this didn't do that the simulation that I showed earlier did was unified the transit. That's one of the concerns in this part of the city, is that the transit has to use this couplet, and so you don't get that concentration of transit on one street. So we also looked at doing two-way approaches that would sort of favor the primary direction of the one-way couplet today by having 2 lanes in that direction and then having a single lane going in the other direction, again integrating cycle tracks. This, interestingly, only allows for widening of the sidewalk on one side of the street. Then we looked at, well, you know, maybe we could treat these streets differently and deal with the issue, and this is one of the things that comes up in a lot of these kinds of projects when you're thinking of making a complete street. Can you really fully provide for all of the modes within the cross-section given the existing right-of-way? So this alternative explored putting the bikes all on Howard in a 2-way cycle track, and then having Howard be one way in the direction that it travels today. And then Folsom, which is where the community has said they want to have their neighborhood commercial street, make it 2-way, design the street so that bikes can be sharing the traffic lane, but don't have cycle track, don't have bike lanes, and then have enough room where you actually can widen the sidewalk and get that sort of more of a Main Street kind of feel. The city is moving forward exploring one of the options to keep the couplet and having some discussions with the bike community about this option, because I think overall there's a favoring of this option, but this issue of having the cycle track just on the one street and at the ends where this improvement would stop, there's some complications in moving over a block and whatnot. But if those things can be resolved, it's possible that they'll move forward with this alternative. So that's sort of the story of the Better Streets Plan to date, how it's being implemented. Again, you can Google SF Better Streets, and that will get you to this web page. You can download the entire document and see what's happening with the implementation of the plan. Thank you.
The things that I'm sort of taking
Did I miss any of the
visual notes.
6?
Is there any questions for Bill? All these up.
I have a question about one of your photo simulations. I think it was the Sunset neighborhood. Was there a plan for power lines, or they just weren't shown in the simulation?
It's the plan over time in the city is to underground. So we went ahead and illustrated that. But yeah, that is an issue and would affect the selection of tree type.
With the Folsom and I forget the other street, the one you were just showing.
Folsom and Howard, yeah.
Did you consider the possibility of having it be a one-way couplet, but with a counterflow lane just for buses, so the buses could go both directions, but cars only one?
That's sort of what we're doing. But because of access to businesses and concerns about getting paratransit access to uses, it was decided to go ahead and have local traffic in that lane as well. This isn't one of the high priority transit corridors for the city. It's an important line, but having an emphasis on throughput is not as important as some of the other streets that we've been looking at. So it was a trade-off that MTA is comfortable with from a transit standpoint.
Is that one more question?
Let's see. I guess in the back.
How temporary was it? Temporary on the street cafe area? Is that taken back up each night? Or was
it remains out there, but it's designed and installed so that it could be easily removed.
And did it require an ordinance or legislation? Was it something you could do within the existing?
No, they did have to get approval of some standards from the Board of Supervisors. It started out as a little bit more of an experiment, but now there are standards for it, and it's moving forward as a pretty organized program. There's one improvement that was done recently in more of the central business district that Audi sponsored, paid for the design, paid for the construction. There's no advertising on it, but they can sort of promote that they did it. And there's a couple of other businesses now, major businesses, that are looking at doing that. Most of it's been voluntary design effort. The designers are often involved in the construction, and then the adjacent retail businesses take responsibility for maintenance.
There is a video on it, either a street film or it's called Parking to Parks. I have the link. I can show it at the break. At the break. But yeah, that's an interesting question, because your question is about, and the answer was about, not about street design manuals, city street design manual. It was about generating interest for a different use of the street and the machinations that did it, and have economic interests that support it, which then forced the issue so that the people who are designing the streets say, oh, we need a manual for how to do this. So you're actually generating, the support for what we're doing.
Just two things I did want to mention that sort of come to the economic issue. One, there is some efforts in the city moving forward where the city has always had it in their rules that the maintenance of sidewalks and the landscape are the responsibility of the adjacent property owner. They're looking at being much more aggressive about that now, probably doing enforcement and making it much more clear to property owners that that's the case. So it'll be interesting to see how the politics of that play out. And then one of the things that's been interesting about this in terms of the guideline, the standards being sort of a toolbox and not coming up with sort of unified agreed to street sections, as we've been working through a lot of these street designs on the eastern neighborhoods, It's become clear that sort of how things play out for the pedestrian realm, for the sidewalks, is pretty challenging because the city has sort of as a, I don't think it's an official rule yet, has basically said, well, in the redesign of these streets, if we can't move the curb at least 2 feet, and preferably more than 2 feet to widen the sidewalk, it's not worth the cost of moving the curb. And I think that's one of the real challenges for pedestrian improvements, is they're always seen as sort of the last improvement. Okay, well, we have our bike lanes, we have our transit priority. Gosh, can we do anything for the pedestrians? Oh, wow, we have to move the curb. That's, you know, that's going to affect drainage. That's going to be really expensive. Nah, let's not do that. And I recognize the cost, but I think there's a lack of understanding of the importance of pedestrian realm for all these other modes that we're providing for, and also for the economic side of this on the land use side. Getting that good pedestrian environment can be really important for the businesses. So I think that's going to be an ongoing challenge in San Francisco, is making those decisions on where they can, you know, quote unquote, afford to make the pedestrian improvements.